candidates for this race were Glenn Ivey and Donna Edwards. Donna was a congresswoman previously, and she had a track record of being fairly hostile to the U.S.-Israel relationship. And Glenn is completely the opposite. Glenn has a very strong history with the pro-Israel community. He's been to Israel before, and so it really was a very stark choice.
My dad is Glenn Ivey, the Democratic nominee for Congress, former state's attorney for Prince George's County, and a great guy. I was looking at the polling, and when we started, we were at 12%, and Ms. Edwards was at 36%.
But, I always felt this was a race that we could win. The only issue I thought was whether we would have the resources to do it in a way that would give us a chance to sort of close that big gap.
When we got AIPAC's endorsement, we got so many calls from people saying like, oh, wow, like you actually have a shot here. And we didn't know exactly what that meant until, things really started to pick up.
Hey sir, how's it going? How are you today?
The members of the community, the pro-Israel community, played a great role in this race. Not only did we raise money for him locally, but we told all of our friends across the country how important this race would be.
We really changed the trajectory of this race and of, this entire district. You all stood when nobody else was willing to stand with us, and I will never forget that.
Right? This race is an example of what we can do and what we can accomplish and the impact that we can have.
I think that in a lot of respects, being involved in the political process is the most uniquely American thing that I do. And I think that when we as a community come together, we are acting as true patriotic Americans. We're doing something on an issue that we all feel passionately is going to strengthen America. This is about what's good for America.
Hi, I'm Tara Brown, AIPAC's Mid-Atlantic Regional Director, and I'm here today with my good friend, Glenn Ivey. Glenn just recently became the Democratic nominee for Maryland's 4th Congressional District, and since the district is overwhelmingly Democratic, he is the likely candidate going to Washington in January. Glenn, it is a real pleasure. We've been friends a long time, so it's really a personal privilege to be able to be here with you today and welcome you to, almost officially, to Congress in January. Congratulations on your win, and we're really thrilled to have you here today.
Well, thanks for having me today. And yes, we go back. We were just talking before we started filming, 20 years plus, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's a neat moment.
How are we that old?
Well, I certainly look older than you do. I got a big head start, but it's neat to be able to build those kinds of relationships over that period of time, and you never know. As my mom used to say, the chances go around. The same people you meet on the way up are the same folks you see on the way down. So we're trying to be nice to everybody. And
That's right. Well, I'm glad that we are on the way up together. So, Glenn, before we get into some questions about Congress and your career and in Israel, I just want folks to get a sense of who you are. Tell us a little bit about your personal background, your family, and who are you?
Well, I'm originally from North Carolina. My parents were both from a town called Rocky Mount. I was born in segregated era. The schools were segregated. My mom worked in the school system. My father had been a brick mason originally, went into the military, came out, finished school on the GI Bill, and then got a job with the Johnson administration in a program called Manpower. So he used to drive across the state to go do the work, and coincidentally carried a rifle and a .45 with him because it was a controversial position that he had at that time. But the schools desegregated. We ended up moving right around that time up to Dale City, Virginia, where Potomac Mills is. And I grew up there. 3rd grade through high school, I stayed in Virginia, which was a neat upbringing. It was a good environment to grow up in, and wonderful childhood. Had a chance to go to college at Princeton, then Harvard Law School. went to work immediately in a law firm in Baltimore, Gordon Feinblatt. Did it for about a year and then went to Capitol Hill. I'd always been interested in politics, and I saw how the civil rights movement impacted our lives when we were living in North Carolina, and then after we moved to Virginia, and I was always interested in that. So when I had a chance to go work on the Hill for Congressman John Conyers, I jumped at the chance and launched the political career that I've been on, off and on, I guess, over the years since then. But I've spent years practicing as a private practice attorney. I've been a federal prosecutor. I was twice elected as a state prosecutor. They call it state's attorney in Maryland. Did some work in various other positions. In the Senate, I was a staffer during the Whitewater hearings. So as my mom used to say, I can't keep a job. I jumped around quite a bit, especially for that era, where she's from the school where you get one job and you stay for 40 years. I've had many jobs and have been very blessed with a great career.
You have had many jobs and many careers, and all of them quite impressive and interesting, and most of them focused on civil service. So thank you so much for everything that you've done.
Appreciate it.
So let's shift a little bit and talk about Congress. You ran in 2012, and then again in 2016, which was a really, really close election. And then you made the decision in 2021 to run again. Tell us what prompted you. What were the driving forces that led you to make the decision to make a third run for Congress?
Well, yeah, people were wondering that for sure, especially by the third round. They were like, "Come on, Glenn, what's going on here, man?" But after I was state's attorney, I was elected in 2002 and served through 2010. Did 2 4-year terms. Decided not to run for a third term. I just thought we'd had a great run, but I thought it was time to let somebody else have a crack at it and get some new blood in there. So I left office and then started thinking about running for Congress, in part because they'd just redrawn the lines. Donna Edwards was the member of Congress. I thought I could take her on and beat her. But at the point where I was about to jump in all the way, I got pushed from unions who had helped her beat Albert Wynn when she got elected, and told me they'd run a multi-million-dollar campaign against me if I got in. And I knew I couldn't raise enough money to keep up with that. So I dropped out in 2012 and stayed in private practice. At that point, I was a Venable law firm. 2016 came around. Donna decided to run for the Senate. The seat came open. I jumped in. Anthony Brown also jumped in. We had, I think, like 9 candidates running at that time. Anthony beat me by 7 points. We raised $1.12 million, somewhere in that range, so we were ahead of the field. But there were independent expenditures that came in for other candidates that I think pulled votes away from our campaign. And Anthony won, and we congratulated him and supported his efforts. To my surprise, he decided not to stay in Congress. The Attorney General position in Maryland came open. He announced he was going to run for that, and I jumped into the race for Congress. Frankly, I thought my career in politics, at least for running for office and being elected office, was over. Wow. Because I really expected Anthony to retire from the seat, and we're roughly the same age. But as soon as he announced he was going to run for Attorney General, we got right in.
And what's the driving force, though? I mean, this is something that's very important to you. I've known that you've wanted to be a member of Congress for a long time, and you're clearly dedicated in making that happen. So what is the compelling force that leads you to want to be a member of Congress? Why do you want to go to Washington?
Well, I mean, I think public service has always been something that's been very important to me, because I realized in a lot of ways, and I saw it happen in my life, that public policies had a direct impact on my family and my opportunities. I had chances to do things that my parents could have never have imagined, just because of the civil rights movement and some of the war on poverty, LBJ and the administration. There are things that happened in the 60s and early 70s that sort of transformed the world for me in comparison to them. And so I realized I'd been very fortunate to have that opportunity, and as I came up and saw other people not getting the same opportunities, the world being a difficult place and challenging place for a lot of folks, and we had the Vietnam War, and there was just so much going on in the late 60s, early 70s that I just got very interested in it. And in college, I majored in politics. I, was, sort of active in trying to work on campaigns at that point, although there wasn't really a lot happening around Princeton. But when I got to law school, there were presidential campaigns, 84 and 88. I was in law school in 84 in Boston. There was a guy named Mel King who ran for mayor. He was African-American, didn't win, but it was a Rainbow Coalition campaign that struck me as interesting. And I got involved in that to some extent. And then when I came out of law school, I went to work for Congressman Conyers and fell in love with Congress, fell in love with Capitol Hill, and I've been working to get back there.
Great. So you talked about how when Congressman Brown announced that he was going to be running for Attorney General. By the way, Congressman Anthony Brown has been a tremendous friend of the U.S.-Israel relationship and of AIPAC. But he announced that he was going to run for Maryland Attorney General immediately after you announced that you were going to run for the 4th Congressional District. And it was a race between a few individuals. And then in January of 2022, a few months after that, Donna Edwards, a name that is familiar with many of our viewers, announced that she was getting into the race. Now, for people who aren't familiar with Donna Edwards, she is a former member of Congress and has a national profile from being on different national television shows and syndicates. So how did Donna Edwards, the former member of Congress and with a national profile, getting into the race, change the dynamics of the race?
Well, I kind of expected her to get in. When I first decided to run, I called her, and because we sort of looked at who might run, who could be a real challenge, and we'd been hearing that she'd been interested in it. So I called her up. It was a very short conversation. She was unhappy that I was planning to get in. I told her I was going to do it. She said she was going to think about it. And then we started hearing, there's polls being taken, things like that. So we pretty much expected her to come in because her polling numbers were higher than mine. As you mentioned, the MSNBC work that she'd done had given her a good platform. I think a lot of the voters had, watched her on television and remembered her from that. I'd been out of office at that point 11, 12 years. And so even though I had still some residual positives, people remembered me, but absence makes the heart grow fonder is one saying, but out of sight, out of mind is more likely in politics. So we knew we'd have a challenge there. It was a third candidate. I didn't think, I felt that we could beat him pretty handily because he just didn't have name recognition. He'd been elected to a delegate seat, but it's just a really small percentage of all of the precincts in a congressional district. So we thought we'd be okay there. But we knew if Donna got in, she'd be viewed as the front runner, and that's pretty much how it happened. So the first polls that came out had her up, various polls, but mid to upper teens, and so we knew we had our work cut out for us, and so we started running ads pretty early. Sort of the primary was in July. We started running ads in January, and didn't know if we'd have enough money to make it all the way through, but that's what we started doing. And we targeted radio first because it's cheaper and because it's a predominantly African-American district, and there's really only about 4 or 5 radio stations that most African-Americans are listening to. And so we targeted those. Wanted to get my name back out there, get name recognition again, remind people of the positive things we've done when I was state's attorney, because we'd gotten real positive feedback from the community during that time period. And we just wanted to see if we could level the playing field pretty quickly.
So we're going to come back to the election and the campaign in a couple of minutes. But I want to ask you another question about Congress. You are the likely nominee, so most likely you will be going to Washington in January. And you also spoke about your time on the Hill as a staff person. Now, Congress, politics, the political environment has changed a lot since your time on the Hill. And you spent some time, as you referenced, in the Democratic counsel to the Senate Whitewater Committee. which was a very partisan moment in American history.
Yeah.
But I think it has become much more partisan today than it was even back then. So tell me, how do you look at the current state of partisanship? What are some of the lessons that you learned from your time on the Hill on how to do things in a bipartisan framework? Were there instances that you as a staff person were able to cross the aisle and work with your counterparts on the Republican side? And how do you see your role going into Congress in January and your ability to be able to cross party lines and work together?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I would have given you a very different answer 3 or 4 months ago. But I think in the interim, we just had the IRA bill passed, the Inflation Reduction Act, the infrastructure bills passed, the gun bill passed. Although none of these bills are perfect, and I think they all have they're good first steps, but there's a lot more work to be done. But I think there's a sense at this point that there's an ability to get things done in 2 possible ways. One is just on straight party line votes, depending on the arrangements that are there in the Senate. If we've got control of the House, everything's coming through that we need to get through pretty much. The Senate had been the brake, so to speak, on the efforts to move legislation through, and that was primarily Manchin and Sinema. But I think they've come around on some of this legislation and helped to move it through. The Inflation Reduction Act was really a deal that Schumer and Manchin worked out behind closed doors and got it done just over the weekend a few days ago. The infrastructure bill is another one of those. The gun bill, though, was actually to some extent bipartisan. So I think that there's a possibility there, depending on whether there's a strong enough push from voters across the board to move things forward. And I think there's some issues where that's happened. I'm under no illusion that that's like a kumbaya moment on Capitol Hill, though. So I know that there can be a lot of divisive issues going forward, and there'll continue to be food fights on some of these issues. But I think we have to fight these fights and make sure that even when we reach agreements and find compromise and common ground, it has to be done in a principled way so that both parties are getting something out of it that benefits them and their constituencies. And I think that'll help to move the country forward in a faster way than it's been going really in the last 5-6 years, I guess.
And Glenn, you mentioned a lot of issues that are causing partisan divide. But an issue, obviously, that we care a great deal about, and you're familiar with this concept because you've been doing a lot of work with AIPAC over the years, is Israel. And one of the fears that we have is that Israel is becoming a partisan issue. Many of the folks that you have talked about, Congressman Anthony Brown, House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, who you know pretty well, they've been leaders in trying to keep Israel from becoming a partisan issue. So tell me a little bit about why Israel should remain a bipartisan issue and some of the ways that you'll be working with your fellow colleagues, both Republican and Democratic, when you get to Congress to ensure that Israel remains bipartisan.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, just over the weekend, we had sort of Israel and missiles being fired out of Gaza. I was talking to Julie and my son about it. There's, I think, 1,000 rockets were fired over like a 4-day period.
Yeah.
And so I just, you look at that and you try and figure out how to move forward with that. And that wasn't even Hamas. That was this the jihad group. Yeah. So, which apparently is even further down the road than Hamas. So I think, when you're dealing with that sort of scenario, I think Israel not only has a right to defend itself, but really deserves as much support as it can get from the United States and other allies around the world. I mean, it's a democracy. I think it's, I know they're having some challenges right now with, the government, and they've got another election coming up. And the United States can't throw stones. We've certainly had some government problems too, but and there's a lot of that going on around the world. But I think really Israel's stand is, I think they're trying to do the right things with respect to building the country, building the economy, reaching out to neighbors. The Abraham Accords, I thought, were a huge step forward. And so I think they're trying to do the right things in the right way. But they have to be allowed to, from a security standpoint, to protect themselves and their citizens. And I think we should support that for sure.
Great. Well, thank you so much for saying that. So since we're talking about the pro-Israel community, you know that the pro-Israel community across the country was incredibly supportive of your campaign.
Yeah.
Tell me, some of the folks that you worked with, you've known for a number of years, but you met some new people. Tell me a little bit about the relationships that you formed in the latest campaign, and some of the experiences that you had working with the pro-Israel community, and the support that they were able to provide.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting over my career. Especially after I got to college, North Carolina, Virginia. I almost knew no folks that were Jewish, as far as I could tell. I think there were the Schlankers across the street. They did Hanukkah instead of Christmas, but other than that, that's about all I could point to. But Princeton, Harvard. When I got to Capitol Hill or Department of Justice, we started meeting a broader array of people. Frankly, I didn't really think about whether they were Jewish or not in that time. But in hindsight, clearly a lot of my colleagues were Jewish. Clearly, a lot of my early supporters when I ran for state's attorney were from the Jewish community as well. So we built that up over the years. But this race was a little different. I think Donna's background and some of the votes that she'd taken, I think, had made AIPAC and others, pretty nervous about her going back. And, as you mentioned in the question there's some growing sentiment in the Congress, especially with the squad and some other members that I think is unsettling. And, you've got other movements, BDS and the like, especially in academia and some of those circles that are raising some new concerns about efforts to undermine U.S. support for Israel. And so there was a lot of folks who came up and stepped up to help us out on that front. We'd written our Israel position paper, which is pretty much the same as it was in 2011. And the position paper was largely based on the trip I'd taken to Israel, and I think it was 2005. Mm-hmm. We went with the JCRC here in the DC area, and just happened to arrive during the disengagement from Gaza, which was a real eye-opener, I gotta tell you.
I'm sure,
yeah. I mean, the steps that the Israeli government took to clear out the area, just literally almost dragging people out of those, what they considered to be their homes, and then turning it over to the Palestinians was, pretty striking. Because it's hard to imagine the United States, for example, giving back Texas or, anything like that. It's certainly by force by the government doing it. So I for me, it was a real eye opener. And then to see how it kind of disintegrated into, I guess the Palestinian Authority had been governing it at first. Hamas basically, took over, not by force, but by, I guess, democratic support at some level. And then, as had been predicted by some, it was used as basically a launching pad to fire missiles into Israel and launch attacks at Israel. So, seeing all of that to me was a big wake-up call. And, the way it played out in this election, AIPAC and others decided to join with us. We had a long track record on that front. Donna had a long track record too, and I think mine was better than hers, and I think that led people to really step up and support our campaign in a surprising
stark
way.
comparison, yes.
Yeah, in a surprising way. So we deeply appreciated the support. I think in some ways it was certainly unexpected at that level and maybe unprecedented. I haven't really looked around, but we had independent expenditures that were run. And the beauty of the independent expenditure ads, I think, in this race was that, yes, it was independent money, but the ads that were run by UDP were factually accurate. They'd been essentially vetted in 2016. Chris Van Hollen ran on similar issues than we did, in 2022. And so there was a real sort of playbook that UDP followed in spending the money. And it resonated in part because I think people knew it was true and widely viewed as she was bad at constituent services. They ran the ads just basically lifting quotes from the Washington Post, which were hard to dispute. And when she tried to push back on it, we had video that, from a community debate at one of the retirement communities here in the district. We sent it to the Washington Post and said, you draw your own conclusions about her basically acknowledging that she had problems with constituent services and saying she'd do better. But that's a tough argument to make because she'd been in Congress for 10 years. All of the things that she was basing her candidacy on, I've been there before, I've got this track record. All of these things actually ended up playing against her because, she had been there before, and over a 10-year stretch, she still couldn't get that fixed. And just to be really blunt about it, it's not hard to put together a good constituent service program in a congressional office. I think most members of Congress recognize that. They put the focus and energy into it. And so you don't really hear much about, them having these types of problems, but it was legendary for her office. And, it worked out for us because the public remembered it after being reminded.
So, Glenn, as you know, I actually just returned from Israel. And while I was there, the IDF carried out a precision strike against the leaders of the terrorist organization Islamic Jihad, based in Gaza. In response, Islamic Jihad launched over 1,000 rockets and missiles into Israeli population centers. Thankfully, Iron Dome was able to intercept the majority of these attempts to hurt innocent civilians, and there were no Israeli casualties. What were your thoughts when you were watching this unfold? And tell me a little bit about what you were thinking about Iron Dome, which received so much support from the United States Congress.
Yeah, I thought sort of a couple things. One was the Israeli strike came around the same time that the United States killed, I forget the guy's name, number 2.
Al-Qaeda, yep.
Yeah, and, the United States was happy about that. It's a death, but it's someone who needed to be brought to justice. And there was no real pushback anywhere in the United States or even in the international community that I heard with respect to that. The Israeli strike seemed to be pretty much the same thing to me and done for the same reasons. So the fact that there would be such a different reaction for something that's, I think, certainly morally and militarily equivalent, I think says more about people who are after Israel and looking for reasons to complain and argue against them, or in this instance, launch missile strikes in retaliation. So I thought the response was not justified, to say the least, by Islamic Jihad. And, it's interesting too, even Hamas distanced itself from these missile
Right.
strikes. But the other point too was, as I mentioned before, 1,000 missiles at relatively short range. I don't think there were any Israeli casualties, even military casualties, but no
Right.
civilian casualties. So it's really pretty astonishing how effective Iron Dome has been. And thank God it's there. If you have a scenario where Islamic Jihad or Hamas or whoever has control over that kind of weaponry and is going to be willing to attack civilians to the point where, my son was just over there a little while ago. He was talking about kids being trained. Soccer, they're having a soccer game, but they know when the horn goes off where the shelter is to run. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That is really crazy that kids have to be drilled in that way. I guess the U.S. equivalent is, in schools now we have, instead of fire drills when I was a kid, now there's active shooter drills. That's where we are in the world, I guess. But I think from the standpoint of Israel and what it's doing, it's I'm glad the United States supported the effort to help them build Iron Dome, and I think they're using it in a responsible and completely reasonable way.
Yeah, yeah. As you said, thank goodness for Iron Dome.
Yeah.
Okay, last question, and this is going to maybe create some uneasy family politics here.
Uh-oh.
And there are a lot of politicians in your family. As you mentioned, Julian just went to Israel. Actually, I know he wants to go back to Israel. Your wife, Jolene, also really wants to go to Israel, and you are going to have the opportunity to travel with your fellow colleagues to Israel with the AIEF, AIPAC, American Israel Education Foundation. Tell us, who are you taking? Everyone wants to know.
I mean, it's not even my decision. You know, this is Jolene's going to make that call. My wife wants to go. Happy wife, happy life. I'm looking forward to escorting her to Israel.
Well, we are very much looking forward to both of you going to Israel, and we look forward to working with you for many, many years to come. Really appreciate the time that you gave us today.
Thank you. Appreciate the time.
Of course, of course. And thank you all for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you again on the AIPAC app.